Meredith is my coach, so I'm a coach and she's my coach, but she's a meditation teacher. And I just said to Olivier, it would be really cool to have Meredith on the interview or on the podcast because because Olivier.
I don't know anything.
Yeah, but Olivier is like French. Do you know what I mean? So I don't need to say any more than that. And Meredith, I made her go and read your book, and she said, "Well, I won't learn anything from it because she's eaten the polycanon or whatever it's called, polycanon. Sorry,
polycanon.
Yeah, and she's all things Buddhist, and she read it and she thought it was great.
Oh, thank you.
I really did. Actually, I did learn some things. It was a really good read.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what you would have learned other than a few swear words, but
no, she didn't.
That's important.
She definitely didn't learn any swear words. I've heard her talk. She definitely didn't learn any swear words. But
now I want to read this book now.
Yeah, you see,
it's really good. It really is. In fact, I love the way you just described every stage of your progression and the Spirit Rock. I've been to Spirit Rock. I've done that retreat. I was right there with you in it. I thought it was great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Well, can I kick this off, Olivier? Do you mind? Okay, I always do. I always dominate.
Now, can I just, before you do?
Yes.
Because I would like to warn Dan. Because remember, when we started this adventure with this podcast, we exchanged in one email and to say, okay, who we would like to invite on this podcast, right? You know, at the very beginning of this adventure, and Dan Harris was part of your guest with the Pope, right? You wanted to invite the Pope and Dan Harris. And I think that's the two people. And I think we succeeded halfway. So we are there.
No, the Pope's next week. He's just not.
Oh, yeah, that's true. The Pope is next week. So we have Dan Harris and we have the Pope.
Right. I think you should count on perpetual 50% victory.
Yeah. Well,
so we need to celebrate, my friend.
Don't. Yeah. Well, we are celebrating. We are celebrating.
Okay.
But I originally saw you on a Mind Body Green talk, which I thought was fantastic, and
thanks.
I don't want to get too self-indulgent like I always do, but I just felt like your life mirrored mine. I went through panic attacks, I went through taking ecstasy and clubbing and all that kind of thing, except your hairline never did recede, whereas mine did, you fucker. You know, it's just like you kept talking about it receding. I'm thinking, no, I was worried about that when I was your age, but mine actually did recede. And as I read the book as well, 10% Happier, which I think I'll say is the second best book I've read this year, and that sounds a terrible thing to say to a guest, but second best book I've read this year, but also the second best book I've read in the last 2 or 3 years. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it just felt like
is number one like something by Proust or
well, no, actually
50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, it's 50 Shades of Gay, actually, the one that I read. The porn, but yeah, it's actually Kelly McGonigal's The Willpower Instinct, but only because it opened my mind to a lot of things that I could use with clients. But your book was probably more enjoyable, and because I felt like I was reading about myself, but a more successful, hairier version of myself. and also the title, 10% Happier, when I told Meredith, you've got to buy this book, so she bought it on Kindle and she downloaded it, and then she texted me a picture of her Kindle that wouldn't charge, and she said, I bought this book and my Kindle won't fucking charge, I'm 10% unhappier now, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. And I said, you've got to tweet that to Dan, you've got to tweet that, but I don't think she did.
I did tweet it.
Oh,
he didn't pick it up.
But he ignored you.
Yeah, I think he did. I got brushed off. That's okay.
I usually, I don't reply to all tweets, but I usually press a favorite. So it must have been a bad day if I missed your tweet. Try to be assiduous with that.
So anyway, first of all, I mean, thank you very much for joining us. We're absolutely pumped. We don't want to be too starstruck, but well, me and Meredith are fans. Olivier was too lazy to read the book. I think he'll read it now because we've been banging on. Banging on about it. I wanted
because of the swear words.
Yeah, because of the swear, he gets offended by swearing. Yeah. I wanted to. It's really difficult introducing you. You must get sick of being introduced as the guy And I've talked to two people in the last couple of days about this, about the guy that had a panic attack on TV. Because I used to have panic attacks, and I said to a friend this morning, I said, I can imagine me having a panic attack, asking them about this, and then I will be the guy that had a panic attack, introducing the guy that had a panic attack on TV. And how fucked up would that be if I was remembered for that? So does that actually, I mean, because it's difficult to segue into what you've done without talking about that experience, but do you just get fed up with it sometimes?
No, I don't. I've become a little numb to it, but I'm not fed up with it. I think that it's part of the story and it gets a lot of attention, and I like the fact, hey, look, if you're in the business, as I now am, of trying to convince people to meditate, you really need to jump through flaming hoops to get people interested. Mm-hmm. And to have a good story to go with it that gets people's attention is a huge asset. And so I'm not fed up. It doesn't have as much emotional charge as it used to. Mm-hmm. When I first started discussing it, it was like really embarrassing and painful to relive. It is not anymore.
Okay. All right. Well, I could keep talking, and you guys butt in at any book. I know Olivier will. He'll sit there picking at his chin in a very French, solemn stare, and he'll stare at his navel a couple of times. But Meredith, I know you're going to have stuff, so just dive in. Otherwise, I will just keep talking all the time. So I'm going to keep talking. Here's the deal. Here's where we had a guy on the podcast the other about a month ago now who works in quantum physics. And the reason why he was one of Olivier's guests, and the reason why he wanted him on was because this guy said the most scary person in the world to him was Deepak Chopra. And because of the way he used quantum, and he said he doesn't understand quantum. And it was a great podcast because this guy just talked, and he was so animated and so excited and so just like they don't understand it and they're trying to use quantum physics to... And I loved in the way the book that you, first of all, it was very self-deprecating, and when you realised you'd fucked up on something, you went back and said, you know what, I was wrong on that, and I love that, and I think that takes a lot of guts to do that, rather than try to stand your ground and say, well, maybe I was a bit wrong, but this, and this, and you sort of volte-faced a little bit on Eckhart Tolle at the end, and also you're a bit cautious about the Dalai Lama, and then obviously warmed incredibly to him, and he seems an amazing guy. You never kind of went back to Deepak Chopra. Now you're talking to friends now, Dan.
We are.
We're not fans. Do you know what I'm saying? With the horn-rimmed spectacles and the way he gets agitated, and the way he stalks people on Twitter for somebody that's enlightened. I just wondered, did your opinion soften on him because you specifically mentioned the other two?
Yeah, I actually wrote something about reconsidering Deepak on some levels that didn't fit it just didn't fit, and I regret that on some levels. So I what I would have said and what I would say now, I'm just trying to recall it all, is that I actually like hanging around with Deepak. I think he's an enjoyable guy. Mm-hmm. I think he's a very funny guy. I also think he's very smart. I don't know anything about quantum physics. I am aware, however, that many people who do not agree with his use of it. So I guess what I would say is I stand by the fact that I suspect that some of what he's saying is probably scientifically controversial, to say it diplomatically.
Is that euphemism for wrong?
That's a way of saying other people believe he is wrong.
Okay.
And also, I stand by the fact that I don't understand a lot of things he says, and at times he behaves in ways that, at least to somebody who's outside of his mind, mm-hmm. outside of Deepak's mind, seem to be contrary to what he's preaching. So I stand by all of that. But I will say that nonetheless, I know, to the extent that I know him, and I also know his kids a little bit, he is a nice guy, at least from what I've seen. And his kids who I know just a little bit, seem extremely well-adjusted and kind and successful. So it's hard for me to write him off as some sort of thoroughgoing bad guy. But he's great fun to make fun of. And this notwithstanding the fact that I made fun of him with reckless abandon in my book, he, tweeted positive things about it. So he seems to have a good sense of humor. And if you watch the documentary that his own son made about him, where, he I don't know if you guys are aware, there's a documentary called Decoding Deepak made by his son, which exposes how Deepak is constantly on his BlackBerry and lots of other foibles. Deepak watched it, and I talked to him afterwards. I actually interviewed Deepak and his son together. And Deepak said, watching the documentary, he realized that he was making some mistakes in his public presentation and in his personal behavior, and he decided to make some changes, including not being so glued to his BlackBerry. So that told me that at the very least, this is a guy, while many people believe he's wrong about a lot of stuff, he's willing to accept constructive criticism. So you're all looking at me like I'm crazy and not telling you the truth. But this is the way I feel.
No, not at all. I mean, the thing is, you have an insight into him that we don't. So it would be, I think some of his early books are excellent. I mean, we've spoken about this, and I said and I've said to Olivier and other guests that sometimes I think his message gets lost in the pseudoscience. We don't need to be able to explain everything, and it's almost like he feels like he's got the need to explain the law of attraction or his beliefs when maybe it's just okay not to know. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen the interview he did with Richard Dawkins where he claimed that quantum physicists had hijacked the term quantum physics, which is kind of like, I'm guessing by looking at your face you've not seen that, which is kind of like, no. It's an interesting thing. And then after that, he went on a blitzkrieg after Richard Dawkins on Twitter and basically mocking him and what have you. And it's kind of like, if you're enlightened, do you do that? And I think when you get to that level, you set yourself up for ridicule, I guess, I feel a bit guilty about saying that. You made me feel bad now, Dan, but in a good way, because I'm doing what you've done now in terms of backtracking, and I bit him. Well, maybe I'm wrong about the guy because he is obviously highly intelligent. Sorry.
Okay, can you stop talking about Deepak Chopra, because I can watch you digging your grave, So can we go back? So shut up.
Not for the first time. Yeah.
Okay. And we can see Meredith is back again, So this show is a little bit chaotic, but that's fine. That's fine. This is how we are. We love imperfection, and that's good. And for me, who haven't read the book, because let's say I won't characterize all the French that maybe are lazy to read. I don't know, but I'm personally lazy, so I didn't read the book. But can you walk me through what happened to you? Because I've watched the segment bit where you had your panic attack, right? I watched that. And for me, it was like kind of almost like 10 seconds of something happened. You cut the program, and then what? What happened after? What happened off air? Can you tell me?
So it was pretty quick. And I get one of two reactions to it. So, just by way of, there may be viewers or listeners who know nothing about this, so let me just back up a step. It happened in June of 2004. I was on a popular American show called Good Morning America on ABC News, which is still my employer, and I was supposed to be reading the headlines of the hour, and I was a few seconds into my shtick, and I had a panic attack. I couldn't breathe anymore. And if you look at it, some people look at it and say, "Oh man, you were having a panic attack." Other people look at it and say, "It didn't look that bad." It doesn't really matter because I know what the internal reality was, which is that I was losing my mind and I had to quit right in the middle. And had I not had the opportunity to throw the verbal baton back to the main hosts of the show, it would have descended into flop sweat and like a Tourettic outburst or something like that. So And what happened off camera was everybody, sort of ran over to me and make sure I was okay, and because they knew that I was supposed to have read 5 or 6 more stories, and so clearly something was wrong. I lied and said I was fine, even though I knew I had had a panic attack. And then, to make a long story short, I actually then had another panic attack about a year later in a similar situation, which was a much more mild panic attack, but nonetheless a panic attack. And I after that, I went to an expert in panic to try to figure out what was going on. And he asked me a bunch of questions to get to diagnose me. And one of the questions was, do you do drugs? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, okay, asshole, mystery solved. And so the backstory to that is that as a young, ambitious reporter, I had spent a lot of time in war zones in Iraq and Afghanistan and the Middle East, and I had come home and gotten depressed and self-medicated. I had never used drugs before. I was in my early 30s and I started using drugs. And that was enough, even though I was using drugs only intermittently, it was enough to artificially raise the level of adrenaline in my brain and prime me to have that panic attack. And that incident was one of a couple of things that ultimately put me on a path to finding meditation.
Well, I'm interested to know, because I've done a couple of presentations where I wouldn't say I had a full-on panic attack, but and I don't think you had a full-on panic attack. I think it was
a full-on panic attack.
Oh, okay. Well, I've had something.
I've had minor, but that was the real deal. I just happen to have an extremely good poker face, and so what felt to me like Armageddon registered as shortness of breath visually, but I've had the whole spectrum of anxiety to full-on panic, and lots of versions in between, and that was the full thing.
Okay, because I've had stuff similar to that where I'm struggling to talk, and it used to take me like 30 minutes to recover. Get a lot of background noise. Is that? I don't know if that's you, Meredith.
I think maybe it's Meredith. Yeah.
And it took me a long time to recover. Now how long did you have to recover?
I think it's Meredith.
Meredith, I think there's something wrong with your mic.
How long did it take me to recover? I think there was a certain amount of I don't remember exactly, since it was 11 years ago, but I went back on the air an hour later. But I was a mess psychologically for a long time, just by way of an example, recently I had an experience where I was giving a public. I was on TV, and I had just the beginnings of a panic attack didn't happen, but just that made me ill physically for like a day. Because the amount of adrenaline that gets released is just, it's devastating. And that wasn't even a panic attack, really. It was just like the initial tinglings of it. It can be debilitating. I was a younger man 11 years ago, and I think it didn't physically incapacitate me as much as it would now. But it's having that amount of adrenaline dumped into your system it can set you back.
So is that something that's on your mind? You said something happened sort of recently. So is that at the forefront, not the forefront of your mind, but is it there all the time?
It's on my mind, not necessarily at the forefront. I haven't had a real on-air panic attack in 10 years. And I think that is because I don't do cocaine anymore, largely. So I think taking cocaine out of the picture reduced the odds of a panic attack, exponentially. So I don't think I'm constantly in danger, but sure, once the brain learns how to panic, it gets very good at panic. And I can't say that I'm permanently out of the woods. But I feel much more confident. And that is not only because I don't do cocaine, but I take care of myself. And that one of the big variables is, for panic is how well rested you are. Are you in good shape? Are you psychologically fit? So that's where meditation and having good relationships and all that stuff comes in. So I'm using every possible variable to reduce the odds.
Meredith, do you want to come in?
Yeah.
With your very dodgy mic, because otherwise I can just dominate things.
I can ask stupid question as well.
Now we can't hear.
It's not working, but
no,
Meredith.
It's not working. Dan's doing a great job of kissing a cute cat, which will be great when we put it on YouTube. It's like, well, there was a cute cat, so who cares? It will go viral. We need more. We might need more cat, Dan. Okay, so
come on back here. Yeah, I'll get her back.
Have the cat ready. Yeah.
I'm at a standing desk, and she likes to get up here with me.
I thought
sometimes.
you were. I wondered if you were. Yeah. That's the hip, cool thing to do, is standing desk.
I don't know if it's hip and cool, just because I'm old and my back hurts if I sit too much.
Stop that. I hate it when people say they're old. When I know,
hear me now,
I know
right?
they're 10 years younger than me. Yes, we can hear you now.
Meredith.
Well, no. I'm old. You're ancient. So that's
Dan, I knew why I wanted you on here. It was completely to undermine.
Done.
I'm now going to have a panic attack.
Done.
You do realise this, because I realise that I'm close to death. Yes.
I call you the ancient now. From now on, the ancient. But there's wisdom in this name. You're ancient. Like a monument or something.
Yeah, because let's face it, all monuments are.
Are you old enough to have a statue? No.
The sheer passage of time does not inexorably lead to wisdom. I just want to point that.
No, I agree.
I agree, and you're the perfect example.
to me, wisdom is knowledge, but the application of knowledge, of knowing how to apply it. Meredith's going into a complete meltdown because we've got.
I can see that as well. Do you think that? Yeah, Meredith, you have a panic attack as well? No.
Yeah.
That's a very wrong what I've just said, but that's okay.
It isn't wrong. It's highly amusing. Dan, is this the most professional podcast you've ever been on? Top three.
I think you said earlier that you like imperfection, and you're definitely there's a lot to like.
We're achieving it,
yeah.
So actually, let's go on that actually, because I'm fine with what's happening for me. This to me it's okay. Having Meredith, panicking and the bad sound quality and all this, because for me there's an aliveness. There's something which is real, and this is how life is, right? And watching, what big media outlets are doing, the way that everyone speaks, like anchors, like yourself, on media. There's this tone and there's the way that you speak which is not natural at all, right? And when you see the like new medias coming from YouTube's, like Young Thugs, or
Young Turks.
Young Turks, who are very like they take this standpoint to say, okay, let's talk like normal people.
Yeah.
Let's talk like people can, and let's cut this professional tone, What do you think about that? Do you think that, is it like we're talking about ancient and future? Where do we stand here on this?
I think you raise an excellent point, and I would say that I one of my many flaws is that I grew up in this system. I was 22 when I started anchoring the news, and it's like part of, and now I'm 44, so fully half of my life has been spent reading a teleprompter.
Right.
So there, we do have this way of talking that is, as you say, not so natural. And even as I talk now, I realize that I probably have a huge quotient of anchorman in me, and I just can't help it. And I don't like that about us sometimes. So I think to the explosion of new media where people just kind of use their regular voice is awesome. I strongly support it, and I think you're starting to see some of that bleed into traditional media, where a greater extent to a greater extent we are using our street voices as opposed to our made up professional voices.
And do you think that that will come also in the big medias, in the big channels? This is what.
Yeah, I think that you'll see a little bit more of that. But look, one of the things when a 9/11 happens, or
right.
when an Iraq war happens,
right.
I think we do want to turn to somebody who's got decades of experience, who's traveled around the world, who can sit at a big desk and calmly explain what is happening right now, to put it in context, to take government officials and ask them pointed questions from a position of from a position of intelligence and in sort of an informed authority. So I do think there are times when, with somebody with my sort of classical journalistic training, notwithstanding its flaws, can be very useful. But day to day, I do think that we in the mainstream media have a lot to learn stylistically from what's happening on the web.
Cool.
It's interesting. The BBC probably this started to. I've lived in the US for 10 years now. This started to happen before then. They always used to train people to speak with the BBC accent.
Yeah.
And then they actually moved away from, and I can remember the first Welsh newsreader, and it was just like with this broad Welsh accent. It was just like, what the fuck? It's just like, this just doesn't sound right. But then after a while, and it's because like, that's how people are. People sound differently from different places in the world, and you can't, you end up with this homogenized sort of approach where there's no differential, and it just becomes a little bit like white noise almost. I want to ask you something. Are you familiar with James Altucher?
Yeah, I've been on his podcast. Yeah, he's an interesting guy.
Yeah, we had him on our podcast. He's a fascinating guy. He told us a story when he was on the podcast about where he'd been on. He stopped inviting him on TV because if he didn't know an answer to something, he'd say, "I don't know," and he said, "You're not allowed to say I don't know when you're on like some form of news or informational type program." And I was just like, to me, I'm aghast at that because I'm very much shades of grey person. I'll just say, I don't know. I mean, I'm like you. I'm an agnostic. I think it's ridiculous to say God exists. I think it's ridiculous to say you don't know God exists. Nobody knows that. It's just a belief system. So how do you deal with that, Dan? Is there any form of sort of sort of cognitive dissonance with that?
Well, one of the great things about the place I work is that we're not a 24-hour cable talk network. ABC News has distinct broadcasts that are very tightly programmed. So we don't have to fill 24 hours with talk. So I don't ever get in a position where I can't say I don't know, or I have to just keep talking, or I rarely get in that position. Also, I am rarely asked for my opinion because most of what we do is, news and information as opposed to opinion. So that answer is kind of not answering your question, but the fact is, I come from a place that isn't a CNN or MSNBC or Fox News. We do a morning show, an evening show, and a late night show, and none of them is very rarely are we doing extemporaneous opining.
I actually got interviewed twice on Fox News, and when I was rebuilding my website,
Have you?
Yeah. But I didn't really understand what Fox News was then. I was fairly new to the country. And when I said to Chris, "Are we putting these interviews?" He said, "It's Fox News." I said, "What do you mean?" And he explained to me what Fox News was. I'm like, "Fuck, no, don't put those on my website. I'd rather people think I've never been on TV than I've been on Fox News." And since then, I have never been back on Fox News, remarkably enough. So,
Meredith, are you with us?
Meredith.
I think so. Can you hear me?
We can.
I put my speaker away because it's just not working.
Yeah, we hear you.
Come on, say something,
what you guys
Meredith.
have been talking about.
You fucking up the podcast, basically.
By the way, it's all your fault
but
now.
other than that, yeah.
I'm so sorry.
We're joking.
That's fine. It's okay.
Come on.
Well, let me jump in because I have one question for you. One really question, Dan, that I do want to ask you before I seem to go off on my technical issues. I really do love in the book how you try and reconcile your rational mind with some of the more kind of out there concepts, like you talk about in the beginning with Eckhart Tolle. And then even you struggle a lot with Buddhism. You struggle with some of the tenets there. And again, you do reconcile this in the end. But I'm curious how you reconcile it with some of the, the further you get into Buddhism, there's some really out there beliefs. I mean, we think Scientology sounds strange. Buddhism can really be out there. And I'm very much with you on the wanting it to be the rational side. And so I'm just curious how you're reconciling that all of these teachings came from one man that was able to really understand the mind and the suffering of our minds and what the path is to lead out of that. And yet this same man, goes through and recounts all of his past lives. And really that's just one little dash of kind of the oddness of Buddhism. So I'm just curious how you reconcile that.
Well, there are on a couple of levels. One thing we know the Buddha said was, take or leave all of my metaphysical claims. By the way, the Buddha made no claims about the origins of the universe, explicitly and repeatedly refused to make any proclamations about why we're here. But he did make some metaphysical claims about supernormal powers and karma and rebirth and enlightenment. He said you can take it or leave it, but you should try to meditate. And so it's not an orthodox religion. And I believe, in fact, the way I practice it, and I would call myself a Buddha, it's not a religion at all. It is something to do, not something to believe in. And I am not alone. There's a growing school of people who view Buddhism that way. And then the second thing I'd say is there's a fascinating book that's about to come out by a guy named Stephen Batchelor, who wrote a book. He's best known for a book called Buddhism Without Beliefs. He's a former monk, and he is a self-described atheist. And his next book is called After Buddhism. And it is, in this book, he does kind of a breathtaking historical analysis of the Buddhist texts. And he argues, and this will be a very controversial claim, but it is one that I am sympathetic to just because it aligns with my, proclivities. He argues that all of the, sort of wildest claims from the Buddha were inserted after his death. You have to remember, the Buddha said what he said when he was alive, and nobody wrote it down. For 300 years, it was transmitted orally. And then they started to write down, and that was what became known as the Pali Canon, Pali being the language of that the Buddha spoke. And so they wrote it down, and then it had all sorts of permutations. It ended up in China and Tibet and Sri Lanka, and you have different versions, and so there was plenty of opportunity for embroidery. And Stephen Batchelor's point is that the Buddha was, when he talked about nirvana, he wasn't talking about Candyland. What he was talking about was a way of living that wasn't automatically reactive to your emotions. And that is nirvana. And what it's become over the years is, this intensely, a loaded phrase. It's often interpreted as something that happened, like you have, it's called a cessation experience, where the lights go out and your mind stops, and that's nirvana. But Batchelor's argument is all this stuff about rebirth and superpowers and blah, 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 that was added by Brahmin priests later to make it more palatable and to compete against Hinduism and other forms of religion, where they were making claims about superpowers, and so the Buddhists had to have it too. So that may or may not be true, but the bottom line is the Buddha was a genius, and he came up with a way of understanding the mind and living with more integrity and less emotional reactivity and more focus and more calm that works. and it works if in your first-person experience, and it works in an fMRI when they scan people's brains and see what it does to them. And so I would recommend it, and I would recommend it to believing Christians, believing Jews, Muslims, not because I think it will erode your faith, but because I think it can make you more calm and focused while you're praying. And in fact, there's a book called by a theologian who until recently lived here in New York City. That was called "Without the Buddha, I Couldn't Be a Christian." So anyway, that's a long answer, but it's something I feel passionate about.
Ooh.
So you've kind of actually dismissed it based on. Are you kind of saying that you're just dismissing it then, based on the book by Stephen Batchelor?
I mean, what I'm saying is, if the Buddha said it, I don't. I don't agree, and or I suspend my disbelief, to be more respectful. And I'm also of the mind that perhaps the Buddha didn't say it. But the fact is, I don't know. What I do know is that the non-metaphysical, the deeply practical things that the Buddha recommended, like practicing mindfulness meditation, where you watch the contents of your consciousness with some non-judgmental remove, so that when anger or desire arises in your real life, you're not so captivated by it. That works. And that works in the lab. And that works in my mind 10% of the time. Yeah, I do dismiss it. I don't dismiss your question. I dismiss, I respectfully dismiss the idea that the Buddha could move mountains.
You can dismiss our questions, but
it's a great question.
Can I just?
I may dismiss your questions. But that question was
okay.
Great.
Please, I will ask the question.
We're on Skype, so we don't know who's pointing to. He's probably almost certainly pointing to me, actually, Olivier.
No.
Me.
You're a little elderly and frail. I wouldn't point to you.
I'm going to come to New York City. I'm going to kick your ass with my skinny girl arms. Yeah.
Look at your smaller arms.
I know.
Actually,
there are. Well, sorry, can I interject just one more moment on that? I'm sorry, Libby. One second. My microphone's going to go in a minute.
Okay, go, because you have a beauty. Go on, then.
Patronising French bastard.
Because when you get really deeper into the Buddhist teachings, and I went off to be a nun at one point, so I mean, I'm very, very much into the Buddhist teachings. It is the idea of rebirth is critical in dependent origination, which is really if you're trying to get your framework on karma. To really understand the whole cycle of suffering. And for me, I guess that is the one area that I say, you know what, I'm going to give Buddha, or I'll make it, and I've said this to you, Tim, my working hypothesis that yes, this is true because it's very integral to the teachings. And do you find that, I guess just without believing in rebirth, that there's kind of a link in the chain that's missing then for you?
No. I will say I'm only 6 years into this, and I'm by no means an expert. I'm deeply interested in Buddhism, and I study it every day. Not only do I practice every day, but I read and I take courses, and I talk Dharma with my teachers and all that stuff. I am I'm not an expert on lots of stuff, but one area in which I'm definitely not an expert is dependent in origination. I mean, I know what it is, the causes and conditions that lead to our behavior or desire and aversion and ignorance, et cetera, et cetera. But I wouldn't be able to speak cogently about the role of rebirth in that. All I can say is that where the rubber hits the road for me in Buddhism is around mindfulness and emotional reactivity. And one need have no understanding of the deep end of the pool of Buddhist metaphysics to practice that. Also, where the rubber hits the road for me with Buddhism is the systematic training in compassion, which can sound a little bit like Valentine's Day with a machete to your throat because you sit there and like picture people and send them good vibes. But again, the science suggests that it works. And I found. And I'll just quote Abraham Lincoln here, who said that when I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That's my religion. And the Buddha was basically saying the same thing, except for he was systematizing it and teaching you how to train your mind for compassion, and live a life in a way that reinforces your better angels. That is where the rubber hits the road. Another area where the rubber hits the road for me is thinking clearly and consistently about our mortality. We quarantine the elderly in nursing homes and are not confronted, with the exception of this podcast, not confronted with aging and illness in most of our lives. And yet the fact is, we're going to die, and everybody we know is going to die. And Buddhism is a great way to rub your nose in these hard truths, which brings more vibrancy and vitality to your actual life now. And so these are the areas in which the rubber hits the road for me. I don't think much about the role of karma or rebirth, or the various arguments about enlightenment, or the definition of awareness or consciousness. Because while it's an interesting intellectual debate, it doesn't impact the way I live.
I have to come in because you've described karma almost exactly as Meredith has described karma to me. And it's just like, I think there's like a difference in terminology here, but in terms of, you know, when you described it about me, about, you know, if you do good, you feel good. That's how Meredith would describe karma to me, you know. And like I say, she's my meditation teacher, and it's the same kind of thing. So I think maybe we're at and I know you're going maybe a little bit deeper, Meredith, but I think for 95% of what you're talking, you're in agreement with this, and maybe even more than that.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I do agree. Yeah, I do agree. That's why I was just curious his take on that, and yeah.
So we just lost Dan. I love this podcast.
So he's out on that note.
So I think he just hung up because he doesn't agree at all. This podcast is I think the most chaotic one that we ever had, by the way. Huh? No? What do you think?
I also think it's the best one we've ever had.
Yeah, that's fine. I
love this guy.
Yeah, he's very good.
He is. He's not coming back, but he's very good.
I think we have just 10 minutes.
Yeah, we do. I wanted to go back to some other stuff in the book as well, which I'm a bit, if he doesn't manage to make it back, I'm a bit disappointed. But
Meredith, can you give us a little bit more about the Buddha?
Meredith, you blew it. He left after you asked him a testing question.
I know.
He's back.
Oh,
so,
no.
Now
it's your turn, Dan. For Jesus Christ.
I don't think that was me. Was it me?
It was you.
Oh, we were all here, so...
exactly. It's your fault.
Can I change topics completely? Because I want to...
Will you talk about football?
No, I want to talk about something in the book, because... you know, one of the reasons... And I don't want to sound too... too brown nosy, as we would say in England, or but the story, I'd heard the story about Ted Haggard as a Brit, didn't know really anything about the guy, and then I read what you wrote about him in the book and how you got to know him, and I felt really bad about what I'd thought about him previously. Previously I'd mocked him, and I thought, oh, here's this guy that had set up this cult, and
sorry, Tim, can you explain who Ted? I don't know him. Who is this guy?
Well, I'll let Dan explain in a moment. But it set up a church. I say cult. That's not fair. A church, and they were very anti-homosexual, and then he was found to be having sex with people, one guy in particular, and taking methamphetamine and what have you. And I was really impressed. And I'm sounding condescending now, Dan. I don't mean to, but I was really impressed by the way you were able to step back at that and think, you know. And I'll tell you why it really made a mark on me. Because I had a friend who I got to know over a period of years, and did a lot of really good charity work, and then he was accused of being a paedophile, and there's no excuse for that. and my initial reaction was to unfriend him on Twitter, to delete his stuff on my phone. I had 2 guest posts on my website to delete those, and then afterwards I started to think about it. I started thinking, you know what, this guy did so much good work. All his work was for charity. There was never any accusation against him with the charities that he'd done that. They tried to find some stuff like that, and it kind of made me feel. It made me feel a bit, not ashamed. I don't like the word ashamed because it's about the person, but guilty for feeling like that when you were able to step back and say, you know what, I know this guy, and he's flawed, but he was still nice to me and a good person to me. And did you have any compunction about that? Did you have any issue with writing some of the stuff about him in a good light?
Well, I mean, to say the obvious, and I know you're not trying to imply that, nothing Ted did, approached pedophilia, to my knowledge.
No, I know that.
Yeah.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I know.
No, I know you're not trying to say that. I didn't mean to unfairly characterize what you said, but I just want to be clear. While he was clearly a hypocrite, cheated on his wife, did the exact opposite of what he preached, and used drugs, and apparently used drugs, or allegedly used drugs, and allegedly consorted with a prostitute, which is a violation of the law. He was a man who was clearly, sort of living a lie and trapped, and very freely admitted all of his sins. And my understanding, I'm not a Christian theologian, but sin and redemption is a pretty big theme there. And he came clean in a pretty big way and admitted to all of it. And so I don't excuse his behavior, but I do say that we all make mistakes. Some bigger than others, and some more public than others, and doesn't change the fact that while I'm not super close with Ted, I know him well enough to know he's a nice enough guy. If he was revealed to be a pedophile, for example, I would not be saying these things. But from what I know of him and from what I know of his transgressions, it was enough for me to say it didn't change my opinion that he's a nice enough guy. I respect the fact that he admitted his mistakes, and also that I learned a lot from him, as I got to know him when I was a young reporter, and I was really at the beginning of covering faith and spirituality for ABC News, which was a beat that I very much didn't want, given the fact that I'm a lifelong agnostic, and I was quite ignorant about issues related to faith and spirituality, and Ted taught me a lot. So that's basically all I said, and I stand by that, and yeah, so I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Good. Can I ask my stupid question that you'll dismiss now?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
yeah,
so
I look forward to.
We all want that.
Yeah, I know that we all want that. You're okay. So I will come with what I know, which is basically the title of your book, which is 10% happier. So why 10%? Where does it come from? Is it like an actual measure, or is it what makes you not 9.99 or something?
He told you it was going to be a stupid question.
It is a stupid question. Now you can dismiss it.
It's not a stupid question at all. It's a joke. The book, the title of the book. I mean, mostly a joke. You can't quantify happiness, obviously. The root of the title was that when I first started to meditate about 6 years ago, people that I worked with thought it was really weird. Since then, by the way, ABC News is filled with meditators, so it's not considered to be a weird thing. But back in 2009, when I was starting, I got a lot of funny looks, and when I told people what I was up to, and I struggled to talk about it in a way that wasn't embarrassing until one day. One of my very skeptical friends was, pressing me on this whole meditation thing, asking me, why do you do it? And I said, because it makes me 10% happier. And I noticed that the look on her face went from scorn to something approaching interest. And I realized that describing this practice in the part of the PR problem for meditation has always been associated with people in robes promising that you were going to have automatic enlightenment. And when in fact, somebody in a suit talks about how actually it just makes you calmer, more focused, and less emotionally reactive. This practice can become quite attractive for people. And at that time, I was reading a lot of meditation books, and I had this insight that there was room in the market, so to speak, for a book that used the word fuck a lot and employed irony and lowered the temperature of the discussion by not over-promising. So that all feeds into why I use the term 10% happier. It also is a counter-programming against what I think is the reckless over-promising of the larger self-help world, where people tell you that you can solve all of your problems through the power of positive thinking, which isn't going to happen, and in fact get you into trouble.
Yes, we are so anti. Yeah, it does. It causes depression. One of the happiest, most positive people I know in the planet, who was an ex-manager of mine, got Parkinson's disease. He had nowhere to go. And he is now suffering from severe depression. And it's one of the saddest breakdowns of anybody I've ever seen. Dan, I just want to ask you something. I think, and I'm going to let Meredith come back because I think she wants to ask something as well. News. So, about 15 years ago, I was a salesperson in the UK. I was driving all around, and I'd listened to BBC Radio 5 all day, which is basically just sport and news. And beginning of the day, they'd be like, like 3 people have been killed in a fire in such and such. I'd be like, oh, that's terrible. And midday, it'd be like, by 6 o'clock, they have 3 people. I'd be like, fuck them. They probably deserved it. I'm fed up with hearing about this. And to me, I want to get your opinion on local news. Now, to me, all it did was, local news still brings me down. I think there is an element of being aware. I used to be incredibly well informed on geopolitics, and now I'm not. Somebody asked me the British Prime Minister the other day, and it took me about 2 minutes to remember who it was, and I was almost ashamed. And I thought, you know what? I don't care. I really, it doesn't make me happy. So I wonder how you reconcile. I think what you do, and I don't want to be patronising, but I think what you do is a little bit different because you're dealing with bigger news. But how do you see local news? Its only point is to scare people.
I wouldn't say the only point of local news is to scare people. Where do you live?
Orlando,
okay.
Well, last night there was a story on where our murder rate had tripled by 300% in the last 3 years or whatever. And there was we should be scared about the bird flu. I don't put it on, but my wife has it on. Every time I walk through, it's something I need to be fucking scared about. And don't go to bed before 11 o'clock, because if you do, you're going to die if you don't hear this story.
By the way, you will.
Yeah. I will, because I'm like 912, Obviously, yeah. I won't last that long. But seriously, it's just like, you say that, but the point is that's what raises figures when people are scared. At 9/11, how many people were watching 9/11 compared to like the Christmas Day parade at Macy's?
Well, look, this speaks to human nature, and the news exists in a capitalist context, and it's been ever thus. From the little boys on the sidewalk who were hawking papers. In the movies, you see them, screaming the headlines on the sidewalks, and it was always kind of the sexiest headlines that sold the most papers. It's the news reflects the culture it serves, and the news reflects. Sure, it's
not the other way around. Are you sure the news doesn't dictate the culture?
Well, it's symbiotic, for sure. Okay. But there's, the nature of the prefrontal cortex in a human being is to emphasize threat detection, and this is how we survive. This is evolution. And there have been plenty of attempts over the years to create all good news channels and websites, and they don't do well. And that's why there's an expression in journalism is we don't report on the plane that lands safely. What makes it news is when there's a problem. Now, blatant scaremongering, I would argue, is not a good thing. And if that's what's happening on your local station, I don't support it. However, the aggressive and assiduous search for problems that need to be exposed is our highest calling and is something we should be doing. So we should be talking about prison overcrowding. We should be talking about the egregious use of solitary confinement. We should be talking about economic inequality. We should talk about people who don't have health care. We should talk about the campaign finance situation in the United States. We should talk about radical Islam. We should talk about climate change. These are things that are big and scary, and we should talk about.
I agree. But terrorism, more people die from bee stings every year than do from terrorist attacks.
So yeah, absolutely. There's no question. So we don't want to overdo it, but there's also no question that ISIS is scrambling our strategic priorities in the Middle East and does pose a threat by dint of their extremely successful social media outreach. And we should talk about it, but not in a way that is unnecessarily scary, but it should be frank and probing.
Okay. Are we still friends?
You still old man.
Yeah.
Are you going to follow me back on Twitter now? Because I followed you on Twitter.
I get on my high horse about journalism.
No, I understand. I mean, you're invested in it. You've done it for a long time, and I get that. You know, I get on my high horse about life coaching when people knock it, because it's dead easy to knock it. I had a conversation last night with somebody that's just like, we work with two terrible life coaches. One of them who told him, you're depressed. I'm like, a life coach telling you depressed? That's not what we're trained to do. You know, so I do get that. I really do get that. I just think sometimes we can back off a little bit, and you know, more people die from lightning strikes than do from shark attacks, for instance. Yet we don't report lightning strikes, but we do report shark attacks because it's the fear element of that. It's like, oh, get off the, you know. So that's
just to say, we actually on my show on the when I'm on, I always point out that every time we do shark attacks, and we do them a lot, I always point out that they're rare and that sharks are endangered and beautiful animals, and we should, you know, that we ought not to be overly terrified.
If you see one, hug it, kiss it.
Well, you shouldn't hug them, but we shouldn't be cutting their fins off for soup. Is my argument. But my response to your question, I should also say that we in the news media make lots of mistakes, and when we overstep, it's really good to have people in the public who point out, hey, you know, you were egregiously fear-mongering on that, or you were dead wrong on that. And these things happen. It's a messy business. We're reporting things in the heat of the moment in front of large numbers of eyeballs, and mistakes are inevitable. We're flawed human beings. And so I certainly am open to our fallibility, and I welcome criticism. So I didn't mean to...
You just stop being so nice and reasonable. You know,
I'm going to say something nice,
you're just confirming everything I already thought about you. And I was hoping you were going to be a complete bastard. You know, so sorry,
you know, push me hard enough. You never know.
Yeah,
I do have so nice just because unfortunately it's 4 o'clock and I'm supposed to be on a conference call.
Okay.
But for which I apologize. But this was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
It was brilliant. Awesome, man. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan, for this. I appreciate that. And sorry for all this imperfection. But
I agree with you. The imperfection is what makes it lively. So
absolutely. That's it. So I'm not sorry, actually. Thank you very much.
Your book is excellent, and we're going to pimp it out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. By the way, we have a new app if you want to pimp that out too.
Yes,
10% happier.
We will. Send us an email and we'll do that. I'll put that in my blog post.
Okay, cool.
Nice. Okay, take it easy. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Stan.
Oh, I thought that up, didn't I?
What did you say?
I fucked that up, didn't I?